When you think of India, you think of Gandhi and his incredible leadership in overcoming British rule. However, if it was Gandhi that made India free, then it was Nehru that rebuilt India. Between 1950 and 1960, the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru of the Indian government was vital to overcoming the challenges of deindustrialization and laying the foundations of modern India. By the start of the 19th century, British control in India had expanded from a collection of coastal ports to complete control of the subcontinent. Under 200 years of British rule, Indians suffered both economic and humanitarian devastation. On the economic front, India saw a long period of deindustrialization. This culminated in manufacturing, trade, and agriculture, all three of the basic economic pillars of India being systematically wiped out. The British troops systematically destroyed the looms of weavers, shut down production centers of all types, and prohibited all Indian-built ships from trading with European countries and the United States. Furthermore, all Indian products saw a 70 to 80% tariff, allowing British-made goods to flood into India, undercutting the entire market. By 1896, Indian mills produced only 8% of textiles consumed in India. The destruction of these artisan and production industries drove people to agriculture beyond the levels the land could sustain. The influx of labor caused massive drops in wages, rural poverty to soar, and the creation of new British-controlled plantations. Even with the massive strain on agriculture, farmers saw an average of 85% of their crops taken as tax. On the humanitarian front, India was governed by a policy of divide and rule, pitting Muslims, Hindus, and Christians against each other so that they would fight themselves instead of the British government. It was in this environment Cambridge-educated Jawaharlal Nehru returned to India. Upon returning, it was the sight of widespread poverty, economic hardships, and religious violence that led him to fight for an independent India alongside Gandhi. During this struggle, he spent a total of 9 years in jail and rose to party chairman of All Indian Congress, organizing nonviolent protests against British rule. By the end of the Second World War, the British Empire was left depleted. This, combined with the successes of the Indian independence movement, caused the British officials to begin the process of pulling out of India. However, the divide and rule policy had caused such a deep division between Hindus and Muslims that the All-Muslim League, under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, began calling for a new Muslim majority state. This rise in religious violence resulted in the British officials shrinking their exit time from 5 years to 4 months. The team tasked with drawing the new borders was given only 36 days to do the job and finished 3 days ahead of schedule. The decision to partition India into two nations saw Muslim-majority provinces being placed in Pakistan and Hindu-majority provinces in India. However, the border was incomplete and cut right through communities that had existed for centuries prior. On August 14, 1947, 2 days after independence, the borders were made public. This caused 7 million Muslims to move to Pakistan and 7 million Hindus to move to India. This resulted in over 1 million dead and the greatest forced migration of the 20th century. It caused widespread chaos and unspeakable violence, such as cities set ablaze, sexual violence against women, and trains full of dead bodies. After being sworn into office as India's first Prime Minister, Nehru envisioned India to be a modern economic power based on a foundation of secularism and equality. However, at the time of independence, the world was skeptical about whether India would succeed. Britain's former Prime Minister Winston Churchill said, "In handing over the government of India to these so-called political classes, we are handing over to men of straw of whom in a few years no trace will remain." In the United States, a journalist named Selig Harrison stated the issue is in fact whether any Indian state can survive at all. The first step of creating India was the establishment of the Constitution, which contained 395 articles, 30 times larger than that of the United States. It established a series of fundamental rights for all citizens, such as rights to equality, freedom, religion, culture, and education. The creation of the Constitution was only half the battle. The other half was getting all 500 of India's princely states to sign on with the new constitution and to integrate their territories together. By 1950, this process of Indian unification was complete. The final step of stabilization was to form new states in India, basing each state around a major language. In doing so, Nehru further helped heal the social divisions by allowing each language group to operate their own state in their own language and appointing 5 out of 12 of his cabinet positions to non-party members in order to make the cabinet more representative of India. Changing the focus to economics, the Indian Planning Commission was founded in 1951 and laid out a series of 5-year plans to modernize India's economy. The first 5-year plan was focused on agriculture and hoped to raise the poor rural farmers out of poverty. The second 5-year plan was centered around the industry and hoped to transform India's economy into a modern industrial economy. When India gained its independence, 52% of India's gross national product came from agriculture. Under Nehru's leadership, the government attempted to improve Indian agriculture by implementing reform and industrialization. A part of Nehru's land reforms were to abolish large land holdings and to introduce large-scale cooperative farming. The first 5-year plan also saw the creation of new irrigation projects as well as hydroelectric dams. The target goal for the first 5-year plan was a 2.6% GDP growth rate. However, the plan went better than expected. India saw higher crop yields and farmers lifted out of poverty. At the end of the first 5-year plan, India hit a GDP growth rate of 3.6%. With the end of the first 5-year plan in 1956, the second 5-year plan was put into effect with the goal of creating a modern industrial economy. However, the world was skeptical if India had the financial means to pull off such an ambitious plan. In order to fund the bulk of this plan, they turned to deficit financing. Deficit financing was spending money the government did not have. It viewed the economy like a bank account, first taking out huge loans, then spending that to create jobs and economic growth, and finally taxing that growth to pay off the debt. Similarly, during this time, Nehru adopted a policy of non-alignment, preferring to keep India out of the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. This policy of non-alignment during the Cold War meant that Nehru received financial and technical support from both sides in rebuilding India's industrial base from scratch. New steel mill complexes were built with assistance from the Soviet Union and the United States. Under the second 5-year plan, industry grew 7% annually between 1950 and 1965. This extreme and rapid industrialization allowed India to become the world's 7th largest industrial economy. In extreme contrast to the British colonial period, GDP and GNP grew 3.9 and 4% annually between 1950 to 51 and 1964 to 65. While India's economy grew faster than both the United Kingdom and the United States, low initial income and rapid population growth meant that economic growth was inadequate for any sort of catch-up with the rich income nations like that of Europe. Even with the industrial growth, India still lacked the technical expertise of a modern economy. On that subject, Nehru said, "While it is relatively easy to put up a factory or a plant or a project, it is much more difficult and it takes much more time to train the human being that will run a factory or a plant." In response to that challenge, he established the institutional network with the goal of developing a skilled workforce and improving India's scientific capacity. These institutions took the form of institutes of technology, administration, statistics, and atomic energy. The long-term impacts of Nehru's administration can be felt to this day. The Indian Planning Commission would go on to carry out a total of 12 5-year plans before being dissolved in August of 2014. Both India's population and the economy would continue to grow. The economic story in India shows how interconnected the economy is to the world events in the past, the present, and in the future.